And then what type of narration he uses in his novels? That is the next question. And again, I told you that he had great admiration for the Igbo culture, the way of narrating things, the folklore, and all these things. And so, even though he wrote in English language, he got the essence of his writings from the Igbo culture. And he adopts the oral method of narration, typical of Igbo culture. And so the oral method of narration he uses, weaving folk wisdom into the fabric of his stories. And so even though he writes it, his ideas, the techniques, the narrative techniques that he uses is typical of the Igbo culture. Actually, if you go through his novels, you will notice that he mixes literary English, then pidgin English. What is pidgin English? A simplified form of language. Pidgin English is a simplified form of language. And a colloquial English in keeping with the rhythms of Igbo speech. Isn't it? And so, this is the language he uses. Especially the oral method of narration, typical of Igbo culture. The folklore elements in Igbo culture is woven into the fabric of his essays and stories. And then you will see a mixing up of, in his novels, you will see a mixing up of literary English, pidgin English, and a colloquial form of English. And it was all in keeping with the rhythms of Igbo speech. As a child, he was fascinated by the traditional Igbo stories narrated to him by his mother and sister. And he used to narrate these stories to his children and grandchildren. He strongly defended the use of English, the language of the colonizer, as a powerful medium that reaches out to a wider audience. And so remember, even though he focuses, or even though he stresses on Igbo culture, he uses English language for writing his novels. Why? Because we know that English is an international language. And so by using this language, Achebe can reach out to a wider audience. Then, coming to some of the awards that he had received. Okay, and so you have understood the narrative techniques used by Chinua Achebe, and then how he uses English language, even though it was the language of the colonizer, how Achebe uses this language very effectively, how this English language become a vehicle to express his ideas, and even the Igbo culture to the reading community. And so now some of the awards. He got the German Booksellers Peace Prize, then the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize, the Man Booker International Prize for Fiction. He got honorary degrees from over 20 American universities. And then, coming to the lesson that we have to study. We call it an essay. It's from the essay collection, but originally it is a speech. Do you know where this speech was delivered? It was delivered at Cambridge University. On which date? On January 22nd, 1993. And so, remember, in its original form, this particular essay that you have to study was delivered as the Ashby Lecture by Cambridge University on January 22nd, 1993. It was a speech. It was an invited talk. Eric Ashby, who is this Eric Ashby? He was the master of Clare College at the university from 1959 to 1967. And so, the broad theme of the lectures was human values. And Achebe was invited to make this lecture at the Cambridge University. In this Ashby lecture, Achebe discusses how he grew up to be a writer, how he became a writer, and how both the traditional Igbo culture to which he belonged, as well as the newly adopted Christian values and English education informed his understanding of the world. And so, always remember, when you go through his essays, when you go through his novels, you will see the three formative influences. His own Igbo culture, about which he was always proud of, the rich Igbo culture, then the Western education that he received, where he realizes that English, even though it is the colonizer's language, it is the most effective vehicle to convey his ideas to a wider audience. And then I have hinted earlier about the conversion to Christianity. Achebe's parents were converted to Christianity by the Christian missionaries who made their appearance in Nigeria. And so the Christian values also you can see in his writings. And so these three things had influenced him greatly. And all his writings, it is a mixing up of the Igbo culture, the English education that he had received, and the Christian values. Here, though he detested the entire project of colonization, his position was neither antagonistic nor obliging. He took the middle ground. And so this is a line that you notice in many places in the essay, in the speech. What does he say? He doesn't like colonialism. He cannot appreciate colonialism. Nobody can appreciate colonialism. Why? The colonizer is using force on an innocent victim. And you have no right to enslave another person, another country. There is no justice in it. The Europeans, when they colonized Africans, when they colonized Africa, when Africa became an English colony, there is no justification for that. Every country, every people needs its own freedom. Nobody can take away this God-given freedom. And so Achebe cannot appreciate colonialism by any means. But even then, he is not very much angry with the colonizer because he appreciates the great help he got by the Europeans, mainly in the field of education. Because he got access to English education, to English language. And then he comes across many excellent Englishmen, as professors in his university and so on. And so he says that I could never be very much angry towards the colonizer, towards the Europeans. And then, I am not a slave to them. I am not obliging also. I'm not antagonistic. I am not obliging. I won't support colonialism. Nobody can support colonialism. But I will take up the middle ground. He says that middle ground doesn't have any glamour of its own. Usually people who very powerfully protest, they will be noticed and appreciated by everybody. Or when you too much oblige towards another system, they are also noticed by others. But when you stand in the middle ground, see, it doesn't have any special glamour in it. But Achebe says that he prefers to be always on the middle ground, to take up the middle ground. And again, as a writer, he always stressed the use, the educational function of literature. And then he strongly defended the use of English, the language of the colonizer, as a powerful medium that reaches out to a wider audience. His novel, Things Fall Apart, it also shows the helplessness of the indigenous people in the hands of the missionaries and the white men. And so the facts are presented. Since he was from Nigeria, he could not appreciate the Europeans at all. Their colonial rule he could never appreciate. But at the same time, he remembers the benefits he received from the European education and domination. And so, before going to the text, let us recollect the main points once again. See Chinua Achebe, his lifespan from 1930 to 2013. Then you remember him as a Nigerian novelist, poet, professor, and critic. He is known as the father of African literature. He was born in Ogidi, an Igbo town in Nigeria, isn't it? Then the important books, his debut novel, Things Fall Apart, which was his masterpiece. It was converted to 57 languages, 20 million copies sold. Then the second novel, No Longer at Ease, then Arrow of God, A Man of the People, and Anthills of Savannah. And so these are the main works. Then the important themes you remember, the traditions of Igbo culture, impact of Christianity on African culture, the conflict between tradition and modernity, emergent Africa in its moments of crisis. Then the important awards you remember, German Booksellers Peace Prize, the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize, the Man Booker International Prize for Fiction, and honorary degrees from over 20 American universities. And then you remember how he decided to become a writer, to write back against the injustice meted out to the Africans by the Europeans. In order to give a clear picture or the true picture which is different from the depiction of Africans in Western literature. And again, he studied in University College in Ibadan, which is an associate college of the University of London. He majored in medicine, history, and theology. And he was there exposed to English literature. He was a voracious reader. And when he read a lot, he realizes how a Nigerian is presented in Western literature. And so he was upset with the stereotypes of Africans in Western literature and wrote back in his children's book, Chike and the River, which was published in 1966. And he calls Joseph Conrad a thoroughgoing racist for his portrayal of Africans in the heart of darkness.